Under the endless starlit sky of the Arizona desert, a lone cowboy named Jake Morrison witnesses something that will forever alter the course of his life and possibly humanity's fate. What begins as an ordinary night herding cattle transforms into an extraordinary encounter when a mysterious craft crashes near his ranch. Inside, he finds not wreckage, but a being of impossible beauty and otherworldly grace, injured and alone. Against all logic, Jake makes a choice that defies everything he knows. He saves her. But as dawn breaks over the red canyon walls, the alien woman named Lyra opens her eyes and speaks words that chill him to his core. She carries secrets about Earth's true history, hidden dangers lurking among the stars, and a countdown to an event that could reshape civilization itself. What Jake doesn't know is that his simple act of kindness has made him the most important person on the planet and the most hunted. Their story is about to begin, and nothing will ever be the same. Jake Morrison had always believed the desert held secrets. For 32 years, he'd lived on the edge of civilization, where the Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly toward horizons painted in shades of rust and gold. His ranch, the Dusty Star, set 40 miles from the nearest town, a deliberate choice for a man who preferred the company of horses and cattle to people. Life followed predictable rhythms. Dawn breaking over saguaro cacti, the midday heat that shimmered off red rocks, and nights so clear you could see the Milky Way sprawled across the heavens like a river of light. On this particular evening in late September, Jake sat on his porch watching the sun descend behind Sentinel Mesa, painting the sky in violent purples and oranges. His dog, an Australian shepherd named Dusty, lay at his feet, occasionally twitching in dreams of chasing rabbits. The cattle were settled in the north pasture, and Jake had just finished his usual dinner of beans and cornbread. Everything was exactly as it should be: ordinary, peaceful, predictable. Then the sky tore open. At first, Jake thought it was a meteor. A brilliant streak of blue-white light ripped across the darkness, far brighter than any shooting star he'd ever seen. But meteors don't change direction. This thing moved with purpose, zigzagging through the atmosphere before plunging toward the earth at an impossible angle. Dusty leaped to his feet, barking frantically. The light grew brighter, closer, until Jake could feel heat washing over his face. His heart hammered as he realized it was going to impact somewhere on his property. The explosion lit up the entire valley. Jake threw himself to the ground as a shock wave rolled across the desert, rattling the windows of his ranch house and sending his horses into panicked neighing. When he looked up, a pillar of dust and smoke rose from beyond the northern ridge, maybe 2 miles away. For several minutes, Jake simply stood there, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Every instinct told him to call someone, the sheriff, the Air Force Base, anybody. But his phone had no signal out here, and the nearest neighbor was 20 miles away. He made a decision that would change everything. Grabbing his rifle, a flashlight, and his medical kit, years of ranch work had taught him to always be prepared for injuries. Jake saddled his horse, Thunder, and rode toward the crash site. Dusty ran alongside, still barking at the strange glow that pulsed on the horizon. The ride took 40 minutes across rough terrain, and with every passing moment, Jake's imagination conjured increasingly wild explanations. A military plane? A satellite? Some experimental aircraft that the government would deny ever existed. Nothing prepared him for what he found. The craft had carved a trench 100 feet long through the desert floor before coming to rest against an outcropping of red rock. It wasn't like any aircraft Jake had ever seen. No wings, no engines, no visible seams or panels. The hull seemed to be made of a material that shifted between silver and deep blue, depending on how the moonlight hit it. Geometric patterns rippled across its surface like liquid metal, and it hummed with a sound that Jake felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. Part of the hull had cracked open, and from that opening came a soft bioluminescent glow. Jake dismounted, his hands trembling as he gripped his rifle. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to leave, to get as far away as possible. But curiosity and something else, some deeper pull he couldn't explain, drove him forward. Dusty whined but followed, staying close to Jake's leg. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice sounding absurdly normal in the face of something so impossible. "Anyone in there? Are you hurt?" The humming changed pitch, almost as if responding to his voice. Then he heard it, a sound that was unmistakably a groan of pain. Someone was alive in there. Jake forgot his fear. Years of ranching had hardened him to suffering. When something was hurt, you helped it. It was that simple. He approached the crack in the hull and shined his flashlight inside. What he saw stopped his heart. She lay crumpled against what might have been a control panel, her body partially obscured by debris. But there was no mistaking what Jake was seeing. She was humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but everything about her proclaimed her otherness. Her skin had a faint luminescence, like moonlight given form, with an undertone of pale violet. Her hair, if it could be called that, flowed past her shoulders in strands that seemed to move independently, shimmering between silver and deep indigo. She wore what looked like a form-fitting suit made of the same material as the ship's hull, but it was torn and stained with something that might have been blood, though it glowed a faint amber rather than red. But it was her face that transfixed him. Despite the obvious differences, the slightly larger eyes that tilted upward at the corners, the elegant bone structure that seemed too perfect to be real, the faint pattern of markings along her temples. She was beautiful in a way that transcended species. And she was clearly dying. Jake didn't hesitate. He climbed through the opening, ignoring the way the metal seemed warm and almost alive under his hands. Up close, he could see that a piece of the ship's interior had pierced her side, and that glowing amber blood was pooling beneath her. Her eyes fluttered, open eyes that were the color of galaxies, deep purple shot through with stars of silver light, and focused on him with difficulty. She said something in a language that sounded like musical chimes, urgent and pleading. Jake had no idea what she was saying, but the meaning was clear. "Help me." "Okay," he said softly, setting down his rifle and opening his medical kit. "Okay, I've got you. Just ... Just hold on." He'd dealt with injuries before, horses with gashes, cattle with broken legs, even his own broken ribs from a fall 3 years back. But this was different. Her anatomy was clearly not human, and he had no idea what might hurt her versus help her. Still, some things were universal. She was bleeding, and that had to stop. Working as carefully as he could, Jake cleaned the wound, relieved to find that the penetrating debris hadn't gone too deep. He used his supplies to bandage it, his hands steady despite the insanity of the situation. The woman watched him throughout, those galaxy eyes never leaving his face. At one point, she reached up and touched his cheek with fingers that were longer and more delicate than human ones. And Jake felt a shock of something, recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. When he finished, she tried to sit up, but immediately collapsed. She was too weak to move on her own. Jake made another decision that bypassed all logic. He couldn't leave her here, alone and vulnerable in a crashed alien ship. Whatever else she might be, she was a living being who needed help. "I'm taking you to my place," he told her, unsure if she could understand. "You'll be safe there." Carefully, he lifted her in his arms. She weighed less than he expected, despite being tall, easily 5'10". Her body felt warmer than human temperature, and there was a subtle vibration to her, like holding a purring cat. Jake carried her out of the ship, and somehow managed to get her onto Thunder, holding her in front of him in the saddle. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride back, occasionally murmuring in that chiming language. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the ranch house. Jake carried her inside and laid her on his bed, the only proper place to rest. He covered her with blankets, changed her bandages, and then sat in a chair beside the bed, watching over her as the sun rose outside his window. Dusty lay at the foot of the bed, also watching, his head tilted in confusion. As golden light filled the room, Jake looked at the alien woman, this impossible being from somewhere beyond Earth, and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He wondered who she was, where she'd come from, and why she'd crashed here of all places. Most of all, he wondered what would happen when she woke up. He didn't have to wait long to find out. As the sun climbed higher, her eyes opened again, clear and focused this time. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she spoke in perfect English with an accent that sounded like wind through canyons. "Thank you for saving my life, Jake Morrison. My name is Lyra. I'm afraid I've brought danger to your doorstep that you cannot possibly imagine." Jake stared at the alien woman Lyra, trying to process the fact that she'd just spoken his name in flawless English. He told her nothing about himself during the rescue, barely spoke at all, except for reassuring words she shouldn't have understood. Yet here she was, looking at him with those impossible eyes that held depths of starlight, speaking as if they'd known each other for years. "How do you know my name?" he managed, his voice hoarse. He'd been sitting in that chair all night, watching her breathe, occasionally checking her wound. Exhaustion weighted his limbs, but adrenaline kept him alert. Lyra shifted carefully, propping herself up on the pillows. The movement caused her to wince, one hand going to her bandaged side. "Your language, your identity, I absorbed the information through contact. When you touched me in the ship, when you cleaned my wounds, my people have certain abilities that yours do not. We can interface with the consciousness of other beings through physical connection." She paused, studying his reaction. "I know this must be terrifying for you." "Terrifying doesn't quite cover it," Jake said, running a hand through his hair. He barely slept, and his mind felt like it was operating through thick fog. "You're telling me you can read minds?" "Not exactly. I don't see your thoughts or memories without permission. But language, basic identity, surface emotions, these things transfer naturally when we make contact. It's a survival mechanism. My people are explorers and diplomats. We evolved this ability to facilitate communication with other species across the cosmos." Jake stood and walked to the window, needing distance to think. The morning sun painted the desert in shades of amber and gold, exactly as it had every morning of his life. But everything had changed. Yesterday, he'd been a simple rancher living a solitary life. Today, he was harboring an alien in his bedroom, while his entire understanding of the universe collapsed around him. "Okay," he said slowly, turning back to face her. "Let's start with the basics. Where are you from? What are you doing here? And what did you mean about bringing danger?" Lyra's expression grew somber. "I come from a star system you call Zeta Reticuli, approximately 39 light-years from Earth. My people, the Estreath, have been observing your world for millennia, ever since we detected your radio signals beginning to propagate into space. We don't interfere with developing civilizations. It's our most sacred law. We watch, we learn, but we don't intervene." She paused, pain flickering across her features. At least, that was supposed to be the rule. "What changed?" Jake asked, moving back to the chair beside the bed. "A faction of my people, led by a commander named Zephan, has decided that Earth is too valuable and too dangerous to be left alone. They believe humanity is on the verge of destroying itself through nuclear weapons, environmental collapse, or any number of self-inflicted catastrophes. Zephan's faction wants to intervene, to take control of Earth for its own good. They call it salvation. I call it conquest." Jake felt his blood run cold. "You're talking about an invasion, not in the traditional sense. No armies, no open warfare. Zephan's plan is far more insidious. They've developed technology that can influence human consciousness on a global scale, subtly altering thoughts, suppressing certain impulses, enhancing others. They would essentially reprogram humanity to be docile, manageable. You would lose your free will without even realizing it had been taken." The room seemed to tilt. Jake gripped the arms of his chair, trying to anchor himself to something solid. "And you were trying to stop this?" Lyra nodded. "I'm part of a resistance movement within the Estrith. We believe that every species has the right to chart its own course, even if that course leads to failure. The ability to choose, to make mistakes, to learn and grow, that's the essence of consciousness. To take that away is to commit the ultimate violation." Her voice grew stronger, passionate. "I was carrying evidence of Zafin's plans, proof of the atrocities they're willing to commit. I was going to present it to our High Council, to force them to intervene and stop the invasion. But Zafin's forces discovered my mission. They shot me down before I could reach the rendezvous point. And that evidence?" Jake asked. "Did you lose it in the crash?" "No." Lyra touched her temple, where those faint markings glowed slightly brighter. "It's encoded in my neural matrix. As long as I live, the information survives. That's why they'll be coming for me, Jake. Zephyr cannot allow me to expose his plans. He'll send hunters to find me and eliminate me. And anyone who's helped me." The implication hit Jake like a physical blow. By saving her, by bringing her to his ranch, he'd made himself a target. Alien assassins would be coming to this place, to his home. He should have been terrified. Part of him was. But a larger part, the part that had guided him his whole life, simply accepted the situation and started planning how to deal with it. Yes and no. The ship's core contained materials that can mask biosignatures, but I'd need to retrieve them from the crash site. In my current condition, ... She gestured to her wounded side. "I'm not sure I could make the journey." "I'll go," Jake said immediately. "Tell me what I'm looking for and how to get it out safely." They spent the next hour in intense discussion. Lyra described the ship's interior layout, marked a map Jake sketched of the crash site, and explained how to identify and extract the cloaking device. It wasn't technically called that, the Astrith term translated roughly to dimensional shroud, but Jake understood the concept. The device would bend perception around them, making them invisible to scans and, to a limited extent, to visual observation. But there was a complication. The ship's systems were failing. When Jake had pulled Lyra from the wreckage, the core had been stable. Now, nearly 12 hours later, it was becoming unstable. If Jake didn't retrieve the device soon, the entire ship might undergo a cascade failure, essentially exploding with enough force to create a crater a mile wide. "How soon is soon?" Jake asked grimly. 15 hours. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. Jake checked his watch. It was nearly 8 in the morning. That meant he needed to be back from the crash site by midnight at the latest, probably sooner. He could make the ride in daylight, extract the device, and return before dark. It was doable. "I need you to promise me something," Lyra said as Jake prepared to leave. She'd eaten some of the food he'd offered. Her system could process most Earth proteins, though she admitted it tasted strange to her and looked stronger, though still pale. "If something goes wrong, if Zephyr's hunters arrive while you're gone, don't come back to save me. Take your horse and your dog and ride as far from here as you can. Promise me." "Can't do that," Jake said, checking his rifle. "This is my land. I don't run from trouble on my land. Jake, you don't understand what they're capable of. A single Estrith hunter could level your entire ranch without breaking a sweat. They have weapons that can disintegrate matter at the molecular level. They have armor that your bullets would bounce off like rain. If they come, then I'll deal with it," Jake interrupted calmly. He met her eyes, galaxy to Earth, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended species. "Lyra, I don't know much about the universe beyond this desert. I don't understand dimensional physics or neural matrices or whatever other science you're working with. But I understand this. When someone needs help, you help them. When evil shows up on your doorstep, you stand against it. That's not complicated. That's just being human." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could have sworn he saw something like awe in her expression. Your species is so young, she said softly. Barely out of your planetary cradle. By cosmic standards, you're infants. And yet, ... She reached out and took his hand, her longer fingers wrapping around his. Jake felt that shock of connection again, warmth spreading up his arm. You possess something my people lost millennia ago. A simplicity of purpose, a clarity of heart. We became so advanced, so sophisticated, that we forgot what it means to simply choose good over evil without calculating all the consequences first. We all make choices, Jake said. Some people choose wrong. That's why people like you fight against people like Zephon, right? You haven't lost that clarity. You just have to remember it. He gently pulled his hand away, uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. I'll be back before nightfall. Keep the doors locked, keep Dusty with you. He's a good guard dog. And if you hear anything at all, you hide in the root cellar. There's a false panel in the back. You could stay hidden there for days if necessary. Jake, no arguments. Just promise me you'll hide if trouble comes. Lyra finally nodded, though reluctance showed in every line of her body. I promise. But please be careful. That ship is unstable, and you don't know what sort of automated defenses might still be active. Jake nodded and headed for the door. He paused on the threshold, looking back at the impossible being lying in his bed. An alien woman from the stars who had crash-landed into his life and brought with her the weight of cosmic conflicts. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether the cattle had enough water. Now he was preparing to infiltrate a failing alien spacecraft to steal technology that might save them from extraterrestrial assassins. Jake? Lyra called as he stepped outside. Thank you for everything. Whatever happens, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jake replied with a slight smile. I haven't actually saved us. I just haven't gotten us killed. There's a difference. He saddled Thunder again, checked his gear one more time, and rode out into the morning sun. Behind him, the ranch house sat peaceful and quiet, a small island of shelter in the vast desert. Above, the sky was clear blue, unmarred by any sign of alien ships or impending danger. But Jake knew that clarity was deceptive. Somewhere above that sky, beyond the atmosphere, forces were moving. Hunters were preparing. A countdown had begun. He had 15 hours to retrieve the device, get back to the ranch, and figure out how to protect an alien refugee from her own people. 15 hours to do the impossible. As Thunder carried him across the desert toward the crash site, Jake Morrison did something he hadn't done since he was a child. He prayed. Not for himself, he'd made his choices and would live with the consequences. But for Lyra, for Earth, and for whatever happened when two worlds collided in the Arizona desert under an uncaring sun. The crash site looked different in daylight. Last night, lit by moonlight and the ship's eerie bioluminescence, it had seemed almost mystical, a glimpse into otherworldly realms. Now, under the harsh desert sun, Jake could see the full extent of the damage. The trench the ship had carved through the earth stretched nearly 200 feet, littered with pieces of hull that sparkled like scattered jewels. The ship itself had taken on a darker coloration, its surface now more black than blue, and the humming had grown irregular, punctuated by sharp cracking sounds that made Jake's teeth ache. He dismounted about 50 yards away, tying Thunder to a Joshua tree and approaching on foot. The horse was spooked, rolling his eyes and stamping, clearly wanting to flee. Jake didn't blame him. Every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to get away from the dying ship. But Lyra needed that device, and Jake wasn't about to let her down. Following her instructions, he circled to the opposite side from where he'd entered last night. Here, the hull was more intact, though a series of fractures ran across it like a spider's web. Lyra had told him to look for a panel marked with 3 interlocking circles, the Street symbol for core access. It took him 15 minutes of searching before he found it, partially obscured by sand that had blown against the ship. The panel should have required a biometric scan from an Astrith to open, but the ship's failing systems had overridden security protocols. When Jake pressed his hand against the symbol, the panel simply slid aside with a hiss of escaping atmosphere. The smell that wafted out was strange, like ozone mixed with cinnamon and something sharper he couldn't identify. Inside was darkness broken by occasional flickers of light from failing systems. Jake clicked on his flashlight and climbed through the opening into a narrow corridor that curved upward. The walls were covered in those same flowing patterns he'd seen on the exterior, but here they were clearly some kind of interface. Symbols and diagrams flowed across the surfaces like schools of fish, reforming into new patterns every few seconds. "Okay, Lyra," he muttered to himself, following her directions. Straight for 30 feet, then left at the first intersection, then right at the second. Core chamber should be at the end. The ship groaned around him, a deep metallic sound that resonated in his chest. Jake moved faster, his boots making soft sounds on the floor, which wasn't metal, but something that felt oddly organic, slightly yielding beneath his weight. He'd never considered himself claustrophobic, but being inside this alien vessel with its strange geometry and failing systems made his throat tighten. He found the core chamber exactly where Lyra said it would be. The room was roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across, and dominated by a central structure that looked like a crystal tree branching filaments of some transparent material that pulsed with internal light. This was the ship's power source, Lyra had explained, drawing energy from higher dimensions that humans hadn't yet discovered. As Jake watched, cracks appeared in some of the filaments, and the light inside flickered ominously. The dimensional shroud device was supposedly in a storage compartment along the wall. Jake circled the core, searching for another panel marked with a different symbol, this one showing two crescents overlapping. He found it, pressed it, and breathed a sigh of relief when it opened to reveal a compartment containing various pieces of equipment. The shroud itself looked disappointingly mundane, a silver disc about the size of a dinner plate, with a slight dome in the center. Jake reached for it carefully, half expecting alarms to blare or security systems to activate. Nothing happened. He pulled the device out and examined it. Featureless, except for a small depression that Lyra said would respond to pressure from an Astrith hand, activating its cloaking field. But something else in the compartment caught his attention. Behind where the shroud had been, he saw what looked like a crystalline datapad, similar in shape to a tablet computer, but made of a material that seemed to contain swirling galaxies within its transparent surface. This hadn't been in Lyra's instructions. Curiosity overcoming caution, Jake reached for it. The moment his fingers touched the pad, it activated. A holographic display sprang to life above it, filling the chamber with three-dimensional images and text in an alien script that Jake couldn't read. But he didn't need to read the words to understand what he was seeing. The hologram showed Earth, his world, from space. Then the image zoomed in, focusing on various locations across the globe. Major cities: New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, Sao Paulo. Rural areas with large populations. Military installations. Government centers. Each location was marked with a symbol that pulsed red, and as Jake watched in growing horror, the hologram ran a simulation. The red symbols expanded, and everywhere they touched, the people changed. The hologram showed crowds of humans moving in eerie unison, their individual movements replaced with synchronized precision. Their faces, the detail was incredible. Even in the hologram went slack, expressions becoming neutral, identical. This was Zephon's plan, the invasion Lyra had described. And seeing it visualized like this, seeing his world transformed into a puppet show, made it sickeningly real. But there was more. The hologram shifted, showing a different image, a massive ship, dwarfing anything humans had built, approaching Earth from beyond the moon. Around it, dozens of smaller craft flew in formation, An armada. The hologram displayed a timeline, dates and timestamps that Jake couldn't read, but that clearly showed a progression of events leading to what? Conquest? Transformation? The systematic destruction of human free will. Jake's hands trembled as he held the datapad. This was the evidence Lyra had been carrying. This was what Zephon couldn't allow the Astrith High Council to see. With this, Lyra could prove that Zephon wasn't just proposing some theoretical intervention. He had already assembled an invasion force, already targeted Earth's population centers, already developed a consciousness-altering technology that would turn billions of people into slaves without them even knowing they'd been enslaved. A massive crack echoed through the ship, so loud that Jake felt it in his bones. The core's light flared bright red, and alarms began wailing, a sound that needed no translation. The ship was failing faster than Lyra had predicted. Jake had minutes at most before the core went critical. He grabbed both the shroud and the datapad, stuffing them into his backpack. As he turned to leave, another hologram flickered to life, this one smaller, hovering at eye level. It showed Lyra, but not injured or frightened. This Lyra stood tall and proud, wearing formal attire that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. She was speaking, clearly recording a message, but Jake couldn't understand the words. The hologram lasted only a few seconds before flickering out, but he'd seen something in her expression: determination. Yes, but also fear. And something else. Guilt? No time to analyze it. The ship groaned again, and this time the sound was accompanied by the smell of burning, that same cinnamon ozone scent but amplified and acrid. Jake ran. The corridor had deteriorated since he'd entered. Panels hung loose from the walls, sparking and smoking. The organic floor had gone rigid and brittle, cracking under his feet. Jake vaulted over a section that had collapsed entirely, revealing conduits beneath that writhed like dying snakes. The ship wasn't just failing, it was dying, and its death throes were violent. He reached the exit panel and threw himself through it, tumbling onto the hot sand outside. Thunder was bucking against his rope, eyes rolling white with terror. Jake barely had time to cut him loose and leap into the saddle before the horse bolted. They were 100 yards away when the ship's core finally collapsed. The explosion wasn't fire and smoke like human explosives. Instead, reality itself seemed to hiccup. A sphere of absolute darkness expanded from the crash site, swallowing the ship and the surrounding desert. Everything within that sphere simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but unmade, reduced to quantum foam. Then, the sphere collapsed back on itself with a sound like the universe inhaling, and where the ship had been was now a perfectly smooth crater 50 feet deep and twice that wide. The walls of the crater were glassy, fused by temperatures that shouldn't exist in nature. Jake sat in the saddle, breathing hard, his hands still shaking. Thunder had stopped running and now stood trembling, sides heaving. Jake patted the horse's neck, murmuring soothing words that were as much for himself as for the animal. He'd made it, barely, but he'd succeeded. Then his blood froze. In the distance, beyond the crater where the ship had been, he saw movement. 3 figures, unmistakably humanoid, but wrong in ways his eyes couldn't quite process. They seemed to phase in and out of normal visibility, and even from a quarter-mile away, he could feel something emanating from them, a pressure, a wrongness that made his skin crawl. Zephon's hunters had arrived, and they were looking directly at him. One of them raised an arm, pointing at Jake. Even at this distance, he saw light gathering around the hunter's hand, the same kind of light he'd seen pulsing through the ship's core. Weapon light, death light. Jake didn't think. He kicked Thunder into a gallop and rode like hell itself was chasing him. Behind him, the light discharged. The boulder he'd been standing near simply vanished in a flash of that same reality-eating darkness. The ranch was 2 miles away. Jake had the device. He had the evidence. But the hunters had seen him, and now they would follow. He'd succeeded in his mission, but in doing so, he'd led death straight to Lyra's door. As he rode, the backpack bouncing against his shoulders, Jake realized something else. The hologram he'd seen, the one showing Lyra recording a message, had been marked with symbols he couldn't read, but whose meaning he'd somehow understood through context. It was a final testament, a message to be delivered if she died. Lyra had never expected to survive her mission. She'd accepted, perhaps even planned for, her death as the price of stopping Zephan. The guilt in her expression hadn't been for anything she'd done. It had been for the people like Jake who would be caught in the crossfire of her war. But Jake Morrison wasn't some innocent bystander anymore. He'd made his choice when he climbed into that ship last night. He'd made it again when he'd gone back for the device. And he was making it now as he rode toward his ranch, toward Lyra, toward whatever stood waiting for them both. Some people run from impossible odds. Jake ran toward them, because at the end of that run was someone worth saving and a world worth fighting for. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it had to be enough. Jake pushed Thunder harder than he'd ever pushed any horse, and the animal responded with everything he had. They covered the 2 miles back to the ranch in record time, but every second felt like an eternity. Jake kept glancing back, expecting to see those hunters phasing into existence behind him, but the desert remained empty. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it terrified him more. Predators didn't always stay visible to their prey. He dismounted while Thunder was still moving, hitting the ground at a run and charging through the front door. "Lyra!" he shouted. "They're here. The hunters are." She was already up, standing by the window with Dusty at her side. The dog was growling, a low continuous rumble that Jake had never heard from him before. Lyra had discarded the blankets and stood in her damaged suit, one hand pressed to her bandaged side. She looked stronger than she had this morning, but still pale, and Jake could see pain in the tightness around her eyes. "I know," she said quietly. "I felt them arrive. Their dimensional signature is ... distinct. How many?" "3 that I saw. Lyra, they..." Jake pulled the backpack off and retrieved the shroud device and datapad. "I got what you needed. But they saw me. They fired at me." Lyra's eyes widened when she saw the datapad, and something complex crossed her face, hope mixed with despair. "You found the full archive. Jake, this is everything. Proof of the invasion fleet, the consciousness weapons, the timeline. With this, I can stop Zephan." She looked up at him, and those galaxy eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But only if we survive the next hour." "The shroud," Jake said, offering her the disc. "You said it could hide us. Can it hide us from them?" Lyra took the device, her long fingers finding that depression in its center. The shroud hummed to life, and suddenly the air around them seemed to thicken, to shimmer like heat haze. "It will mask our biosignatures and bend light around the structure," she explained. "But it has limitations. If they get close enough, if they use certain advanced scanning frequencies, they'll detect us. And the shroud only covers a small area, or roughly the size of this house. We're hidden, but we're also trapped. How long can we stay hidden? The device will function for approximately 6 hours before it needs to recharge from a power source we don't have. After that ... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Jake moved to the gun safe in the corner, pulling out his rifle.